My name is Shulamit, and I'm the creator of the MediSounds process. Every Sunday at noon, I host a Zoom meeting for us to explore wisdom teachings and experience the healing power of MediSounds. These meetings are made possible by generous donors. Please help this site thrive by liking and subscribing, and please join our newsletter at greatoctave.com to receive notices of our events. Welcome, everyone. It's been quite a week, quite a month, quite a year. All that we were projecting last year and before that was big changes, and we've been feeling them all along, but there's been a notable intensification in the past few days. I have spoken before, and I'd like to speak about it again, about the power of the individual. Certainly, we're all caught in something that is beyond our control, and I think beyond our control, the control of the people who are theoretically running things. This feels like a cosmic change, things that are welling up from under the surface, institutions being destroyed. Seems more in the realm of a new age coming over which we don't have much control, and we can't see the outlines of the future very well, except to say that it's a bit hazy and definitely very scary. But in this moment, I think it is important to look back on history for some examples of individuals who've made a difference. And they're not necessarily the ones who are known, by the way. For example, in World War II, the Allies had plans for a D-Day invasion on the Normandy beaches, and they had to fool the Germans into thinking it was coming from somewhere else, that the invasion would be in Sicily, so that they could, so that the Germans would be tricked into diverting their troops there. So there were a lot of efforts, of course, for this disinformation campaign. But there were two individuals in Britain, one of whom was Jewish, who came up with this plan to, well, they took actually a corpse, a man who had died, and they dressed him up in tweeds, and they put papers in his jacket, and which indicated something about the plans of the Allies. And I think there was also maybe a briefcase involved, but whatever it was, they dropped this body off the coast of Portugal. And it was picked up along with the papers and delivered to the Germans. There was sympathy for the Germans in the Iberian Peninsula, so it was delivered to the Germans. And the man who reviewed it to see whether he thought it was credible or some fake that the British or the Allies had put up was in fact a hater of the Nazi regime. I think he had one ancestor who was Jewish, and he lived in fear for that reason. But whatever the reason was, even though he was suspicious of the material that was sent to him, he delivered it to headquarters in Berlin, where it was accepted as truth and had an impact on diverting some of the troops from the north of France to Sicily. A quiet operation, and nobody remembers, well, I shouldn't say nobody, there's books and movies about this incident, but these people's names are not household names. You could look at what happened in Iran in this last few days. I mean, the Israeli intelligence was just phenomenal. They knew where these generals and the high command were sleeping. They knew their houses. This is not the first time that they had this kind of in-depth intelligence. Well, how does that happen? Of course, there are spies. But there's a lot of unhappiness with that regime. That regime is the supreme leader. I mean, those people are really hated by some proportion of the population. And we have to assume that they feed information that is necessary for a good, attack to the so-called enemy. So the supreme leader thinks he's protected by his bodyguards and so forth, but actually he's incredibly vulnerable, and may be taken down precisely because of this intelligence that's fed. And you can see this over and over and over again. How did World War I start? The 19th century was very, relatively speaking, peaceful, calm, no major wars. Some radical took it upon himself to shoot the Archduke of something or other in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And 5 years later, 20 million people were dead. The entire geopolitical structure was rearranged. We don't remember this particularly, but and not unless you're really into history, which I am. But in 1918, which is, my mother and father were alive then, the world was ordered with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire. Things were kind of settled, That's part of the reason, I suppose, it was temporarily peaceful. And yet this one act, and I'm not saying he caused the war, because obviously there had to be other very serious problems for that to be inflamed by this one individual. So there are numerous instances of individuals, sometimes very obscure, regular folk, who stand up and do something. I don't know if the example of the assassination of the Archduke is completely appropriate, because I don't know what his agenda was. I think he was an anarchist. But there are people who stand up and have huge influences on history. There was the fruit seller in Tunisia who started the Arab Spring. Of course, it didn't work out the way people had hoped for the long term, but it will emerge again. It will emerge again. So we have to remember that even though we may not have our finger on the course of history through our actions, we may not, be the one responsible for bringing about whatever peace, but we have a role to play, as witnessed by, was it yesterday only that there was the parade in Washington and the counter demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people, no king, whatever. These things are important. They matter. And they're not made up of, only the guy at the top. It's made up by millions of people like us. So you may not feel very courageous. You may not feel like a soldier. You may not feel like being on the front lines. You may not ask for anything. However, we can stand up in simple ways through the decency in our lives, through standing up against hatred and not reacting to violent rhetoric, because violent rhetoric breeds violent rhetoric in you. It's like if you've ever had a fight at Thanksgiving with the various relatives who represent different factions of political opinions. If they're very angry, they really grab you and make you very angry. So to stand fast, to hold the center, to just say, I'm not going to go down this path. I'm not going down this path. It's a more subtle path. It's a quieter path. It doesn't produce the kind of immediate results that having a gun in your face does, but it does produce results. We're in a fight for for our soul in a way, you know, for our decency and for the kind of world we want to live in. And there's a lot of things happening, a lot of influences. So it becomes even more incumbent upon us to do what we can. And it doesn't necessarily have to be out there, you know, in some violence or out there in demonstrations. You can do it in your own way. But the important thing to remember is to remain solid, to remain calm, to not get caught up in the vitriol and rhetoric of other people. They do it precisely to inflame you. And you just have to look at things with a steady eye. I'm not saying that it's easy, and I'm not saying there won't be bad consequences in the medium term. I don't know, but I assume, just like in the war, I mean, just like in Iran, I mean, the government may get overthrown, I don't know. But certainly a lot of people have suffered along the way. But it's the steadfastness of the individual. And these things are very complex, and I don't want to take sides. I just want to say that if you really want to have an impact, don't fall into despair. Don't fall into an attitude that I can't do anything and nothing that I do matters. But instead, stand for a principle, whether it's for your children or your colleagues or your friends or your relatives or your parents or whatever, for your community. Stand for a principle of decency. And when that happens, you know, there's a good result. Not always, of course, but there's a good result. There was a community in Midwest, a rural community, that had among its residents a woman, Chinese woman from Hong Kong, who overstayed her visa. She lived in town. She was there for like 20, 25 years. She worked as a waitress in the diner. She volunteered at the church and the hospital. She was very embedded in the community. She had children and so on. And ICE took her away. And the community, which was very conservative, rallied to her defense, and with their outrage that they would take a contributing member of society and try to throw her out of the country, and the government relented and sent her back. So it matters. You matter. Because I personally believe that this upset that we're experiencing now, the kind of reversal of everything, the instability in the world, the instability at home, this is just the beginning. I think it's going to get harder. And how we position ourselves matters. How we stand up matters. Because the only way to find your way out is to go through. And when you go through something and you hold on to a principle of decency and kindness and compassion or whatever, despite what the onslaughts are, when it's over, which it surely will be, on the other side, you find that the principle stands and that people can resume their lives with hope and with love. I mean, these are the things that propel our lives, love. There's all this movies and things in the popular culture all about aggression and fighting and misogyny and hatred of any outsider, homosexual, whatever. All this stuff. It's a lot of. Of course, it's harsh and it has a bad impact, but it's also a lot of noise, because the thing that counts and the thing that outlasts is not the violence. The most important thing in the world is love. Not whether you have it necessarily in a personal relationship, you don't have to have that, but the fact that whatever, you love your work, you love your community, you love your friends, whatever it is, love is the thing that, when I say love is the answer, it's not like necessarily like a rom-com. It allows you to bear a lot of difficulties if you proceed with love. It really allows you to bear tremendous loss and sorrow. It brings you to humility and it brings you to kindness. Years ago, I met a man in the Y in Long Island, and we were in the pool, and we were swimming. I saw he had the numbers on his arm, which meant that he was in a concentration camp. And he had these eyes that were filled with most profound sorrow and grief. And I had this brief conversation with him, and he said to me, I made up my mind that I would never hate anybody. And I think that's a good way to make up your mind that you're not going to be consumed and driven by the rhetoric, by the anger, by the hatred, that's not going to be what drives you. What drives you is love, decency, constancy, commitment. And we really need as many people who are willing to do this as possible, because there is such a thing as a tipping point. Right now we're in a situation where the shouters have the megaphones, but that doesn't mean that they represent the majority of us. And I think that was made clear yesterday. You know, the parade was not a success. The voices of the people who are finally getting stirred are more successful. And remember that you can take courage from your friends and your peers, and because that's what we need right now. Courage, love. And we'll see where the next month take us. So on that note, I'm going to make sounds. And your job is to receive them. Thank you for joining me today and being part of our community. I invite you to join us every Sunday at noon Eastern Time for the full live experience. Wishing you a wonderful week, and I look forward to connecting with you soon. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Visit greatoctave.com for more details about these webcasts, our newsletter, donations, and more.